U.S. specialists say a trash field situated in the North Atlantic prompts an end that OceanGate's Titan sub experienced a devastating collapse, a vicious breakdown inwards, in a flash, killing every one of the 5 travelers ready. The U.S. Naval Force says it recognized sounds predictable with a collapse, not long after the sub lost contact on Sunday during a plummet to the Titanic wreck at 3,800 meters, 12,467 feet, beneath ocean level, yet this data was just disclosed on Thursday. The deficiency of the profound water vessel was at long last affirmed after an immense pursuit mission nearby off Canada's Newfoundland territory. What caused the collapse? Titan's frame is accepted to have imploded on Sunday because of colossal water pressure. The sub was worked to endure such strain, and specialists will presently be attempting to figure out what precisely turned out badly. Investigation of the flotsam and jetsam might assist with laying out this. Titan is accepted to have been 3,500 meters beneath ocean level when contact was lost. The vessel was profound to the point that how much water on it would have been comparable to the heaviness of the Eiffel Pinnacle, a huge number of tons. On the off chance that there were a break to the construction, the strain outside would be a lot more prominent than the one inside the frame, packing the vessel. In losing Titan, St. John's pondered a natural misfortune. What occurs in a collapse? At the point when a submarine body breakdowns, it moves internal at around 1,500 miles per hour, 2,414 km per hour, that is 2,200 feet, 671 m, each second, says Dave Corley, a previous U.S. atomic submarine official. The time expected for complete breakdown is around 1 millisecond, or 1,000th of a second. A human cerebrum answers instinctually to an upgrade at around 25 milliseconds, Mr. Corley says. Human normal reaction, from detecting to acting, is accepted to be, best case scenario, 150 milliseconds. The air inside a sub has a genuinely high centralization of hydrocarbon fumes. At the point when the body falls, the air auto-lights and a blast follows the underlying fast collapse, Mr. Corley says. Human bodies burn and are gone to debris and residue immediately. How an examination is probably going to continue. Any examination makes certain to zero in on the carbon fiber midriff of the Titan sub. The strain vessels of profound vehicles like this are ordinarily developed from a strong metal like titanium and are molded in a circle, to spread the huge tension similarly around the traveler compartment. However, to fit more individuals inside, the OceanGate sub embraced a round and hollow shape, with a carbon fiber tube embedded between 2 titanium end covers. Carbon fiber is exceptionally extreme. They use it to construct plane wings and hustling vehicles. Jessica Parker investigates how the quest for the Titan sub unfurled and its overwhelming result. In any case, did that enormous tension at profundity, in excess of multiple times the climate at the ocean surface, play on the material to uncover defects in the first creation or to present and afterward demolish dangers over rehashed plunges? Any examination would need to be familiar with the training non-disastrous testing. Airplane are exposed to normal, extremely fine-scale reviews to guarantee their materials are not creating breaks or that their layers are not beginning to isolate. Capturing the Titan garbage found on the seafloor and taking them back to the surface for concentrate on in a measurable lab might permit designers to distinguish where on the sub-primary uprightness was lost, starting the devastating collapse. The essential errand of a submarine is to not collapse. The second is to arrive at the surface, regardless of whether the pilot is oblivious, with oxygen in excess. The third is for the tenants to have the option to open the trapdoor once they surface. The fourth is for the sub to be not difficult to track down, through repetitive following and correspondences frameworks, on the off chance that salvage is required. Just the fifth undertaking is commonly considered the essential one: to ship individuals into the dim, antagonistic profound. At daybreak 4 summers prior, the French submariner and Titanic master Paul-Henri Nargeolet remained on the bow of an Endeavour vessel in the North Atlantic. The air was cool and thick with haze, the ocean serene, the motor turned off, and the Titanic was a few 3,800 meters underneath. The group had assembled for a grave service, to honor the in excess of 1,500 individuals who had kicked the bucket in the most popular sea calamity in excess of a long time back. Lute McCallum, the campaign chief, gave a short discourse, then, at that point, gave a wreath to Nargeolet, the most seasoned man on the boat. As is custom, the most youthful, McCallum's nephew, was brought to put his hand on the wreath, and he and Nargeolet let it fall into the ocean. Inside a shelter on the boat's harsh sat a sub known as the restricting component. In the earlier year, McCallum, Nargeolet, and others had taken it around the Earth, as a component of the Five Deeps undertaking, an excursion to the most profound point in every sea. The group had planned neglected channels and gathered logical examples, and the restricting element's central pilot, Victor Vescovo, a Texan speculative stock investment supervisor who had supported the whole situation, had established various jumping standards. However, to one more individual from the Endeavour Group, Patrick Leahy, the CEO of Triton Submarines, which had planned and constructed the sub, one record implied more than the rest. The Marine Characterization Society (DNV) had ensured the restricting variable's most extreme reasonable jumping profundity as limitless. That cycle was nowhere near hypothetical. A DNV examination engineer was engaged with each phase of the sub's creation, from plan to the ocean preliminaries and plunging. He even sat in the front seat as Leahy steered the restricting variable to the most profound point on the planet. After the wreath sank from view, Vescovo moved down the subhatch, and the plunge started. For certain individuals from the team, the site of the disaster area was recognizable. McCallum, who helped to establish an organization called IO's Undertakings, had moved sightseers to the Titanic in the 2000s, utilizing 2 Soviet submarines that had been evaluated to 6,000 meters. Another group part was a Titanic over the top. His perpetual discussion about davits well decks actually shakes in my mind. Yet, it was Paul-Henri Nargeolet whose life was generally laced with the Titanic. He had plunged it in excess of multiple times, starting soon after its revelation, in 1985, and presently filled in as the submerged examination chief for the association that possesses rescuing privileges to the disaster area. Nargeolet had additionally spent the previous year as Vescovo's well-being director. At the point when I set out on the Five Deeps project, I told Patrick Leahy, "Look, I don't know submarine innovation. I really want somebody who works for me to autonomously approve anything plan you think of, and its development and activity," Vescovo reviewed, for this present week. He suggested P.H. Nargeolet, whom he had known for quite a long time. Nargeolet, whose spouse had as of late kicked the bucket, was a previous French maritime commandant, a submerged explosives master who had consumed a lot of his time on Earth adrift. He had a real standing, the ideal list of references, Vescovo said. Furthermore, he was French. Furthermore, I love the French. At the point when Vescovo arrived at the Silty base at the Titanic site, he reviewed his confidential arrangements with Nargeolet. He had awesome information on the flows and the disaster area, Vescovo told me. He informed me on unmistakable strategic things. Avoid this, put on the harsh, don't go here, attempt and keep this separation at this piece of the disaster area. Vescovo surfaced around 7 hours after the fact, depleted and shook from the garbage that he had experienced at the boat's remains, which hazard snaring submarines that approach excessively close. However, the restricting variable was totally fine. As per its confirmation from DNV, a profound plunge, for protection and examination objects, was anything under 4,000 meters. An excursion to the Titanic, 3,800 meters down, didn't count. Nargeolet stayed fixated on the Titanic, and, in a little while, he was welcome to return. To PH, the Titanic was Ulysses' alarms. He was unable to oppose it, Vescovo told me. A long time back, Nargeolet moved into a profoundly unique sub, possessed by an organization called OceanGate, which had gone through years promoting to the overall population that, for an expense of $250,000, it would carry individuals to the most popular wreck on the planet. Individuals are so enchanted with Titanic, OceanGate's organizer, Stockton Rush, told a BBC narrative group a year ago. I read an article that said there are 3 words in the English language that are known all through the planet. What's more, that is, Coca-Cola, God, and Titanic. Nargeolet filled in as a manual for the disaster area, Rush as the pilot. The other 3 inhabitants were travelers, including a dad and child. Yet, before they arrived at the base, the submarine disappeared, setting off a worldwide pursuit and salvage activity, with a going with media craze focused on counting during the time until oxygen would expire. McCallum, who was driving an undertaking in Papua New Guinea at that point, knew the result immediately. The report that I got following the occasion, sometime before they were past due, was that the sub was moving toward 3,500 meters, he told me, while the oxygen clock was all the while ticking. It dropped loads, implying that the group had cut short the jump, then it lost comms, and lost following, and a collapse was heard. Rush wanted to become a fighter pilot. But his eyesight wasn't perfect, and so he went to business school instead. Years later, he expressed a desire to travel to space, and he reportedly dreamed of becoming the first human to set foot on Mars. In 2004, Rush traveled to the Mojave Desert, where he watched the launch of the first privately funded aircraft to brush against the edge of space. The only occupant was the test pilot. Nevertheless, as Rush used to tell it, Richard Branson stood on the wing and announced that a new era of space tourism had arrived. At that point, Rush abruptly lost interest, according to a profile in Smithsonian Magazine. "I didn't want to go up into space as a tourist," he said. "I wanted to be Captain Kirk on the Enterprise. I wanted to explore." Rush had grown up scuba diving in Tahiti, the Cayman Islands, and the Red Sea. In his mid-40s, he tinkered with a kit for a single-person mini-submersible, and piloted it around at shallow depths near Seattle, where he lived. A few years later, in 2009, he co-founded OceanGate, with a dream to bring tourists to the ocean world. "I had come across this business anomaly I couldn't explain," he recalled. "If 3/4 of the planet is water, how come you can't access it?" OceanGate's first submersible wasn't made by the company itself. It was built in 1973, and Leahy later piloted it in the North Sea, while working in the oil and gas industry. In the 90s, he helped refit it into a tourist submersible, and in 2009, after it had been sold a few times, and renamed Antipodes, OceanGate bought it. "I didn't have any direct interaction with them at the time," Leahy recalled. Stockton was one of these people that was buying these older subs and trying to repurpose them. In 2015, OceanGate announced that it had built its first submersible, in collaboration with the University of Washington's Applied Physics Laboratory. In fact, it was mostly a cosmetic and electrical refit. Leahy and his partners had built the underlying vessel, called Lula, for a Portuguese marine research nonprofit almost 2 decades before. It had a pressure hull that was the shape of a capsule pill and made of steel, with a large acrylic viewport on one end. It was designed to go no deeper than 500 meters, a comfortable cruising depth for military submarines. OceanGate now called it Cyclops I. Most submersibles have duplicate control systems, running on separate batteries. That way, if one system fails, the other still works. But, during the refit, engineers at the University of Washington rigged the Cyclops I to run from a single PlayStation 3 controller. Stockton is very interested in being able to quickly train pilots, Dave Dyer, a principal engineer, said, in a video published by his laboratory. Another engineer referred to it as a combination steering wheel and gas pedal. Around that time, Rush set his sights on the Titanic. OceanGate would have to design a new submersible. But Rush decided to keep most of the design elements of Cyclops I. Suddenly, the University of Washington was no longer involved in the project, although OceanGate's contract with the Applied Physics Laboratory was less than 1/5 complete. It is unclear what Dyer, who did not respond to an interview request, thought of Rush's plan to essentially reconstruct a craft that was designed for 500 meters of pressure to withstand 8 times that much. As the company planned Cyclops II, Rush reached out to McCallum for help. "He wanted me to run his Titanic operation for him," McCallum recalled. "At the time, I was the only person he knew who had run commercial expedition trips to Titanic." Stockton's plan was to go a step further and build a vehicle specifically for this multi-passenger expedition. McCallum gave him some advice on marketing and logistics, and eventually visited the workshop, outside Seattle, where he examined the Cyclops I. He was disturbed by what he saw. "Everyone was drinking Kool-Aid and saying how cool they were with a Sony PlayStation," he told me. "And I said at the time, does Sony know that it's been used for this application? Because, this is not what it was designed for. And now you have the hand controller talking to a Wi-Fi unit, which is talking to a black box, which is talking to the sub's thrusters." There were multiple points of failure. The system ran on Bluetooth, according to Rush. But, McCallum continued, "Every sub in the world has hardwired controls for a reason. That if the signal drops out, you're not fucked." One day, McCallum climbed into the Cyclops for a test dive at a marina. There, he met the chief pilot, David Lockridge, a Scotsman who had spent 3 decades as a submersible pilot and an engineer, first in the Royal Navy, then as a private contractor. Lockridge had worked all over the world. On offshore wind farms in the North Sea, on subsea cables installations in the Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Oceans, on manned submarine trials with the Swedish Navy, on submarine rescue operations for the navies of Britain and Singapore. But, during the harbor trial, the Cyclops got stuck in shallow water. It was hilarious, because there were 4 very experienced operators in the sub, stuck at 20 or 25 feet, and we had to sit there for a few hours while they worked it out, McCallum recalled. He liked and trusted Lockridge. But, of the sub, he said, this thing is a mutt. Rush eventually decided that he would not attempt to have the Titanic-bound vehicle classed by a marine certification agency such as DNV. He had no interest in welcoming into the project an external evaluator who would, as he saw it, need to first be educated before being qualified to validate any innovations. That marked the end of McCallum's desire to be associated with the project. The minute that I found out that he was not going to class the vehicle, that's when I said, I'm sorry, I just can't be involved, he told me. I couldn't tell him anything about the 5 Deeps project at that time. But I was able to say, look, I am involved with other projects that are building classed subs. Of course, I was talking about the limiting factor, and I can tell you that the Class Society has been nothing but supportive. They are actually part of our innovation process. We're using the brainpower of their engineers to feed into our design. Stockton didn't like that, McCallum continued. He didn't like to be told that he was on the fringe. As word got out that Rush planned to take tourists to the Titanic, McCallum recalled, people would ring me and say, we've always wanted to go to Titanic. What do you think? And I would tell them, never get in an unclassed sub. I wouldn't do it, and you shouldn't, either. In early 2018, McCallum heard that Lockridge had left OceanGate. I'd be keen to pick your brain if you have a few moments, McCallum emailed him. I'm keen to get a handle on exactly how bad things are. I do get reports, but I don't know if they are accurate. Whatever his differences with Rush, McCallum wanted the venture to succeed. The submersible industry is small, and a single disaster could destroy it. But the only way forward without a catastrophic operational failure, which he had been told was certain, he wrote, was for OceanGate to redesign the submersible in coordination with a classification society. Stockton must be gutted, McCallum told Lockridge, of his departure. You were the star player. And the only one that gave me a hint of confidence. I think you are going to be even more taken aback when I tell you what's happening, Lockridge replied. He added that he was afraid of retaliation from Rush. We both know he has influence and money, but would share his assessment with McCallum, in private. That sub is not safe to dive. Do you think the sub could be made safe to dive, or is it a complete lemon? McCallum replied. You will get a lot of support from people in the industry. Everyone is watching and waiting and quietly shitting their pants. Every aspect of submersible design and construction is a trade-off between strength and weight. In order for the craft to remain suspended underwater, without rising or falling, the buoyancy of each component must be offset against the others. Most deep ocean submersibles use spherical titanium hulls and are counterbalanced in water by syntactic foam, a buoyant material made up of millions of hollow glass balls, which is attached to the external frame. But this adds bulk to the submersible. And the weight of titanium limits the practical size of the pressure hull, so that it can accommodate no more than 2 or 3 people. Spheres are the best geometry for pressure, but not for occupation, as Rush put it. Soon afterward, Rush asked OceanGate's Director of Finance and Administration whether she'd like to take over as Chief Submersible Pilot. It freaked me out that he would want me to be head pilot, since my background is in accounting, she told me. She added that several of the engineers were in their late teens and early 20s, and were at one point being paid $15 an hour. Without Lockridge around, I could not work for Stockton, she said. I did not trust him. As soon as she was able to line up a new job, she quit. I would consider myself pretty ballsy when it comes to doing things that are dangerous, but that sub is an accident waiting to happen, Lockridge wrote to McCallum, 2 weeks later. There's no way on earth you could have paid me to dive the thing. Of Rush, he added, I don't want to be seen as a tattletale, but I'm so worried he kills himself and others in the quest to boost his ego. McCallum forwarded the exchange to Patrick Leahy, the CEO of Triton Submarines, whose response was emphatic. If Lockridge genuinely believes this submersible poses a threat to the occupants, then he had a moral obligation to inform the authorities. To remain quiet makes him complicit, Leahy wrote. I know that may sound ominous, but it is true. History is full of horrific examples of accidents and tragedies that were a direct result of people's silence. OceanGate claimed that Cyclops II had the first pressure vessel of its kind in the world. But there's a reason that Triton and other manufacturers don't use carbon fiber in their hulls. Under compression, it's a capricious fucking material, which is the last fucking thing you want to associate with a pressure boundary, Leahy told me. With titanium, there's a purpose to a pressure test that goes beyond just seeing whether it will survive, John Ramsey, the designer of the limiting factor, explained. The metal gradually strengthens under repeated exposure to incredible stresses. With carbon fiber, however, pressure testing slowly breaks the hull, fiber by tiny fiber. If you're repeatedly nearing the threshold of the material, then there's just no way of knowing how many cycles it will survive, he said. It doesn't get more sensational than dead people in a sub on the way to Titanic. Leahy's business partner, the co-founder of Triton Submarines, wrote to his team on March 1, 2018. McCallum tried to reason with Rush directly. You are wanting to use a prototype unclassed. The Cyclops 2 needed to fit as many passengers as possible. You don't do the coolest thing you're ever going to do in your life by yourself, Rush told an audience at the GeekWire Summit last fall. You take your wife, your son, your daughter, your best friend. You've got to have 4 people, besides the pilot. Rush planned to have room for a Titanic guide and 3 passengers. The Cyclops 2 could fit that many occupants only if it had a cylindrical midsection. But the size dictated the choice of materials. The steel hull of Cyclops I was too thin for Titanic depths, but a thicker steel hull would add too much weight. In December 2016, OceanGate announced that it had started construction on Cyclops 2, and that its cylindrical midsection would be made of carbon fiber. The idea, Rush explained in interviews, was that carbon fiber was a strong material that was significantly lighter than traditional metals. Carbon fiber is 3 times better than titanium on strength to buoyancy, he said. A month later, OceanGate hired a company called Spencer Composites to build the carbon fiber hull. They basically said, this is the pressure we have to meet. This is the factor of safety. This is the basic envelope. Go design and build it, the founder, Brian Spencer, told Composites World in the spring of 2017. He was given a deadline of 6 weeks. Toward the end of that year, Lockridge became increasingly concerned. OceanGate would soon begin manned sea trials for Cyclops 2 in the Bahamas, and he believed that there was a chance that they would result in catastrophe. The consequences for Lockridge could extend beyond OceanGate's business and the trauma of losing colleagues. As director of marine operations, Lockridge had a contract specifying that he was ultimately responsible for ensuring the safety of all crew and clients. On the workshop floor, he raised questions about potential flaws in the design and build processes. But his concerns were dismissed. OceanGate's position was that such matters were outside the scope of his responsibilities. He was not hired to provide engineering services, or to design or develop Cyclops 2, the company later said, in a court filing. Nevertheless, before the handover of the submersible to the operations team, Rush directed Lockridge to carry out an inspection, because his job description also required him to sign off on the submersible's readiness for deployment. On January 18, 2018, Lockridge studied each major component, and found several critical aspects to be defective or unproven. He drafted a detailed report, which has not previously been made public, and attached photographs of the elements of greatest concern. Glue was coming away from the seams of ballast bags, and mounting bolts threatened to rupture them. Both ceiling faces had errant plunge holes and O-ring grooves that deviated from standard design parameters. The exostructure and electrical pods used different metals, which could result in galvanic corrosion when exposed to seawater. The thruster cables posed snagging hazards. The Iridium satellite beacon, to transmit the submersible's position after surfacing, was attached with zip ties. The flooring was highly flammable. The interior vinyl wrapping emitted highly toxic gases upon ignition. To assess the carbon fiber hull, Lockridge examined a small cross-section of material. He found that it had very visible signs of delamination and porosity. It seemed possible that, after repeated dives, it would come apart. He shone a light at the sample from behind, and photographed beams streaming through splits in the midsection in a disturbing, irregular pattern. The only safe way to dive, Lockridge concluded, was to first carry out a full scan of the hull. The next day, Lockridge sent his report to Rush, Nissen, and other members of the OceanGate leadership. Verbal communication of the key items I have addressed in my attached document have been dismissed on several occasions, so I feel now I must make this report so there is an official record in place, he wrote. Until suitable corrective actions are in place and closed out, Cyclops 2, Titan, should not be manned during any of the upcoming trials. Rush was furious. He called a meeting that afternoon, and recorded it on his phone. For the next 2 hours, the OceanGate leadership insisted that no hull testing was necessary. An acoustic monitoring system, to detect fraying fibers, would serve in its place. According to the company, the system would alert the pilot to the possibility of catastrophic failure, with enough time to arrest the descent and safely return to surface. But, in a court filing, Lockridge's lawyer wrote, this type of acoustic analysis would only show when a component is about to fail, often milliseconds before an implosion, and would not detect any existing flaws prior to putting pressure onto the hull. A former senior employee who was present at the meeting told me, we didn't even have a baseline. We didn't know what it would sound like if something went wrong. OceanGate's lawyer wrote, the parties found themselves at an impasse. Mr. Lockridge was not, and specifically stated that he could not be made comfortable with OceanGate's testing protocol, while Mr. Rush was unwilling to change the company's plans. The meeting ended in Lockridge's firing. Classed innovation in an exceptionally unfriendly spot, he messaged. However much I value business venture and development, you are possibly endangering a whole industry. Rush answered 4 days after the fact, saying that he had become burnt out on industry players who attempt to utilize a well-being contention to prevent development and new contestants from entering their little existing business sector. He figured out that his methodology contradicts the sub-conventionality, yet that is the idea of development, he composed. We have heard the unmerited cries of, you will kill somebody, way time and again. I accept this as a serious individual affront. Accordingly, McCallum recorded various explicit worries, from his unassuming roost, as an undertaking chief. In your rush to Titanic you are reflecting that well-known get cry, she is resilient, McCallum composed. The correspondence finished soon subsequently. Rush requested that McCallum work for him, then, at that point, compromised him with a claim, with an end goal to quiet him, when he declined. At this point, McCallum had acquainted Lockridge with Leahy. Leahy thought of him. Assuming Sea Entryway is reluctant to consider or explore your interests with you straightforwardly, maybe a few different method for inspiring them to focus is required. Lockridge answered that he had proactively reached the U.S. branch of work, asserting to its word-related security and well-being organization that he had been ended in reprisal for raising well-being concerns. He likewise sent the OSHA examiner Paul McDevitt a duplicate of his Cyclops 2 review report, trusting that the public authority could make moves that would forestall the potential for mischief to life. Half a month after the fact, McDevitt reached OceanGate, noticing that he was investigating Lockridge's terminating as an informant security matter. OceanGate's legal counselor Thomas Gilman before long gave Lockridge a court summons. He had 10 days to pull out his OSHA case and pay OceanGate very nearly $10,000 in lawful costs. In any case, Gilman composed, OceanGate would sue him, go to lengths to annihilate his expert standing, and blame him for movement misrepresentation. Gilman additionally answered to OSHA that Lockridge had coordinated his own terminating on the grounds that he needed to relinquish his position and keep up with his capacity to gather joblessness benefits. McDevitt, of OSHA, advised the Coast Watchman of Lockridge's grumbling. There is no proof that the Coast Watchman at any point followed up. Lockridge got the request while he was at his dad's burial service. He and his better half employed a legal counselor, however it immediately turned out to be certain that he didn't have the cash to battle this person, Leahy told me. Lockridge declined to be consulted. Leahy covered the other costs. In any case, after the greater part an extended period of legitimate fighting, and dangers of extradition, Lockridge pulled out his informant guarantee with OSHA so he could happen with his life. Leahy was despondent. He didn't counsel me about that choice, Leahy reviewed. It isn't so much that he needed to, it was his battle, not mine. However, I was endorsing its expense, since I trusted in the possibility that this assessment report, which he wouldn't impart to anyone, expected to come around. Black and white photo of Stockton Rush inside a submarine holding a game regulator. Stockton Rush inside Cyclops I, on July 19, 2017. A few weeks after Lockridge was terminated, OceanGate reported that it was trying its new sub in the marina of Everett, Washington, and would before long start shallow water preliminaries in Puget Sound. To preempt any worries about the carbon fiber structure, the organization promoted the Acoustic Observing Framework, which was subsequently protected in Rush's name. Well-being is our main need, Rush said, in an OceanGate official statement. We accept continuous well-being observing ought to be standard security hardware on undeniably monitored subs. He's turning the way that his sub requires a body cautioning framework into something positive. Jarl Stromer, Triton's Administrative and Class Consistence Director, answered to Leahy. He's making it sound like the Cyclops is further developed on the grounds that it has this framework when the inverse is valid. The sub is so trial, and the element of security totally obscure, that it requires a framework to caution the pilot of looming breakdown. Like Lockridge, Triton's external direction, Brad Patrick believed the endanger to life to be apparent to such an extent that the public authority ought to reach out. He drafted a letter to McDevitt, the OSHA specialist, encouraging the branch of work to take prompt and unequivocal activity to stop OceanGate from taking travelers to the Titanic before individuals bite the dust. It is that basic. He went on. At the lower part of this is all the unavoidable strain in between voracity and well-being. Yet, Patrick's letter was rarely sent. Others at Triton stressed that the branch of work could see the letter as an assault on a business rival. At this point, OceanGate had renamed Cyclops to Titan, clearly to respect the Titanic. I can't let you know the amount I fucking couldn't stand it when he changed the goddamn name to Titan, Leahy told me. That was awkwardly near our name. Stockton decisively organized all that to be out of U.S. purview, for its Titanic interests, the previous senior OceanGate representative told me. It was conscious. In a legitimate documenting, the organization detailed that the sub was being created and collected in Washington, yet will be claimed by a Bahamian element, will be enrolled in the Bahamas and will work only external the regional waters of the U.S. Despite the fact that it against the law to ship travelers in an unclassed, exploratory sub, under U.S. guidelines, you can kill team, McCallum told me. You really do cause problems, legally speaking. However, in the event that you kill a traveler, you're in hot water. Thus everybody was delegated a mission-trained professional. There were no travelers. The word traveler was rarely utilized. Nobody purchased tickets. They contributed a measure of cash set by race to one of OceanGate's substances, to subsidize their own missions. It is genuinely difficult to envision the wisdom it took for Stockton to string together every one of the connections in the chain, Patrick noted. How would I keep away from risk in Washington state? How would I keep away from risk with a seaward corporate design? How would I keep the U.S. Coast Watchman from breathing down my neck? Be that as it may, OceanGate had a resigned Coast Gatekeeper back Chief of Naval Operations, John Lockwood, on its top managerial staff. His encounters at the most elevated levels of the Coast Watchman and in worldwide sea issues will permit OceanGate to refine our client contributions, Rush declared with his arrangement, in 2013. Lockwood said that he trusted, to assist with bringing functional and administrative mastery, to OceanGate's undertakings. Lockwood didn't answer a solicitation for input. Actually, Rush neglected to prevail upon the sub-business. Whenever he asked Ware Walsh, a famous oceanographer who arrived at the most profound point in the sea, in 1960, to counsel on the Titanic endeavor, Walsh answered, I'm worried that my connection with your program at this late date would have all the earmarks of being just an underwriting of what you are now doing. That spring, multiple dozen industry specialists sent a letter to OceanGate, communicating their consistent worry about its impending Titanic endeavor, for which it had proactively sold places. Among the underwriters were Leahy, McCallum, Walsh, and a Coast Gatekeeper senior monitor. OceanGate's expected plunge plan for the spring of 2018 implied that they planned to bring individuals down, and we had a lot of worry about them enduring that outing, Patrick told me. In any case, ocean preliminaries were a catastrophe, attributable to issues with the send-off and recuperation framework, and OceanGate left its Titanic tasks for that year. Lockridge informed Leahy. Lives have been put something aside for a brief time at any rate, he composed.